Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for this track about asking the right research questions. I'm thrilled that we have this panel and moderator today, and then we'll have the pleasure of reconvening after a 30-minute break in this room at 11:30, where we'll have a workshop on designing research questions rooted in community. But to start, I'm going to hand it over to Ernesto for a fabulous conversation. If you're joining us online and you have any questions, I'll also be monitoring the chat, and at the end, we'll have a chance to ask those questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emma. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Ernesto Mendez. I am a professor of agroecology in the Department of Agriculture, Landscape, and Environment in the College of Agriculture here at UVM. I also co-direct the Institute for Agroecology. And this theme is very dear to my heart. At the Institute for Agroecology, we do participatory action research. One of our pillars is the co-creation of knowledge. And I like to say that participatory action research is basically doing research with people for people. So aligns a lot with what our speaker said today. And today, we're going to focus on asking the right questions, which in my view means, how can we be better at co-creating knowledge? How can we be better at doing research with people for people in all of our different initiatives and activities? And we have a very diverse panel that the Leahy Institute chose, and I really appreciate that, because you can see examples of how you can bring this approach to almost anything. And I think that's a really good way of doing it. Our panelists today will be sharing with you how they have been doing this work, as well as some of the challenges and opportunities that they have encountered along the way. So one of the things that I will say is that we don't have a lot of time, so I encourage you to take notice of our panelists so that you can engage them later to get more details about what they're doing. And what we will do in this session is we were going to start briefly by asking the panelists to talk a little bit about themselves in the brief time that they have, and then to share the project that they have selected to discuss today. And then I'm going to be asking them some more punctual questions in order to have a discussion. And at the end, we're going to open it up for discussion. So we've designed it so that there's room at the end for questions and answers, at least 10 or 12 minutes, something like that. So I'm going to refrain from questions while they're talking, and then we'll have an open session at the end. So once again, thank you so much for attending. And I just wanted to briefly tell you who our panelists are. They're going to give you a little more detail about why they're here, why they were asked to come to talk about this very important topic. So first is Colin Anderson. He's a research associate professor in the Department of Agriculture, Landscape, and Environment, and my co-director at the Institute for Agroecology. Then we have, I have Paige is next. She is the director of UVM Spatial Analysis Lab. And then we have Samantha, who's Senior Meteorological Technician of the Water Resources Institute, also here at UVM. And last but not least, we have Jackie Pratt. She's the General Manager of Stowe Electric here, an institution in Vermont. You're statewide? Just the town of Stowe. Yep. Okay, thank you. So, so please, panelists, maybe, Jackie, do you mind if we start with you from that end? If you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and the project you're going to discuss.
Great. So I'm Jackie Pratt. I'm the General Manager of Stowe Electric Department. Oh, into the mic. Got it, guys. Thank you. So I'm Jackie Pratt. I am the General Manager of Stowe Electric Department. We are a municipal utility, public power utility, owned by our customers serving Stowe, Vermont. And there are 14 municipal utilities in Vermont, as well as 2 co-ops and Green Mountain Power, which is the investor-owned utility. We've done a lot of projects with UVM. We started, I think, in fall semester of 2021. We've been working with engineering classes with John Lenz. We've been working with natural resource classes over the last several years with Laura Edling. We've done internships, we've done externships, we've done discrete projects. We're working with Paige on the Solver project, which is with the utilities in the state of Vermont. And more recently, we received a grant through the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships to do a knotweed mitigation project on our parcel in Stowe, Vermont. And we also work with spatial analysis folks who use our parcel as the launch site, so they can do drone AI monitoring of the spread of invasive species. So we're really big fans of the UVM partnership model and the research model that's out there, and we'll get into the details of all of that more, but I'll pass it on.
All right, hi, I'm Samantha Koehler. I am the Senior Meteorological Technician for the Water Resources Institute here at UVM. Water Resources has done a lot of work with the community. I just started full-time 2 weeks ago, so I'm still learning that history. But I am here to kind of represent our new project, the Vermont Mesonet, where we are looking to partner with the community and with the state to develop a weather network to help with flash flood monitoring and, track snow melt, snowpack, and other weather events and climate throughout the state to help emergency preparedness and National Weather Service. So we're really excited to be here. Yeah.
I'm Paige Brochu. I'm the director of the Spatial Analysis Lab here at the University of Vermont. I'm also a research assistant professor in the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources. And a lot of the work that we do at the Spatial Analysis Lab is really founded in community engagement and actually talking with community members about what are questions that they have and how can we either create or collect data that actually answers those questions. So one of the projects that we're currently working on now is with the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and it's really looking at how we can improve efficiency of going from production of food to the actual getting it to consumers, and that's looking and working with the Vermont food hubs. So we're using GIS to actually kind of figure that out. And they're then asking us questions about, well, can you use GIS to actually answer this question for us? So again, a lot of communication, a lot of collaboration as well with communities.
My name is Colin Anderson. I co-direct the Institute for Agroecology with Ernesto. I'm also a researcher and a teacher and an organizer, and I've been doing that for just over a decade. I grew up in Canada in the prairies on a family farm, which kind of fueled my interest in agriculture and food systems. A lot of my work there was community-based participatory action research with farmer cooperatives, working on local food systems and policy shifts to enable those. I then moved to the UK, and I was fortunate to land at a center. It was called the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience. And one of the main tenets of that center was to put participatory action research as the underpinning approach that they were encouraging. So I was able to further develop that approach there. And I also got really involved with farmer organizations and social movements in the UK and in global processes, where we really kind of learned a lot about how to engage from being based at a university with these different community processes and organizations. And now I'm here with the Institute for Agroecology, and we're really thinking about how to support through a number of different ways, including research and education and narrative work and influence work, just transitions in food systems. And one of the things that we've done is try to really anchor this in three different underlying principles. Pillars. Pillars. The first one is transformation. So rather than thinking about minor tweaks to the system, we want to work on immediate problems, but we want to think about the deep-rooted issues and try to work on those as well. We center equity in our work, all of our work, recognizing that it shows up everywhere, and especially in food systems in our case. And the third one is centering participatory action research and transdisciplinary approaches. And as a co-director of the Institute, not only am I trying to implement that in my practice, which I have less time for doing research now because I'm doing more of this work, but really trying to support a community of researchers, PhD students, postdocs, and faculty to adopt and to be able to use community-based participatory action research.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to go and launch the first question that is direct, and maybe I'll ask for a volunteer who wants to go. So the first question is, how do you and your partners decide on what you want to work on? So that is asking the right question is, what is the right question when you're doing collaborative work? And why do you do that? Why do you engage in the way that you do? Anybody want to volunteer?
I mean, we can start down this end if you want.
Sure.
So Stowe Electric, being an electric utility, we have our hands in a lot of different things, whether it's looking at implementing microhydroelectric on our site in Stowe. What do we do with the historically listed 1822 Seaver sawmill building that we have? How can we integrate sheep grazing under our solar panels? What does an EV charging network look like in our community? We worked with Peggy on that recently. So there are a lot of different questions that we're asking ourselves at all times. And the opportunity that we've found is when we come to UVM with a series of questions, what we often do is, for example, in Laura Edling's class, they have natural resources, we might come to them with 2 or 3 potential projects. We let the students sort of self-select what they are most interested in pursuing, and then we give them some really basic guidelines on what we're expecting out of the interaction, but we let them run with it. We find that some of those ideas are things that we never would have thought of, incredibly creative perspectives. Some are completely untenable, like it's not going to work for us, but we really appreciate the exercise that they've gone through. And we think that the benefit of that is they're coming at it from a different perspective, and they have the experience of interacting with a client in a way that's going to help build their ability as they enter the workforce too. And hopefully they find something interesting enough to keep them in Vermont, right? Mm-hmm. So.
Thank you. Want to go, Samantha?
Yeah. Okay. So for us, it was more of, as an institute, how do we use our talents and our studies to serve the state is kind of like our goal. So since we are a water research institute, we wanted to focus more on, hydrological factors while implementing weather monitoring while still serving the community. So being able to take a weather network and put it in our own perspective was kind of our goal, and how can we serve that? So how do we choose what instruments and what monitoring we want to prioritize was the big focus of our project, and how we can implement that back into the community and serve them, and also educate them throughout the process.
Thank you.
So a lot of the work that we do at the Spatial Analysis Lab, or the SAL, is grounded in community requests. So some of the work is actual grant-funded research that we partner with a community member or a stakeholder or anything like that, and we basically go after a research question, more of like a proof of concept, to see if we can actually develop a new method to answer their questions, and then they can take that back and actually utilize it to create actionable change in their community. Another thing too is that communities are able to actually shape the analysis that we do. So some of the work that we do, kind of our bread and butter, is doing urban tree canopy analyses, which is really looking at how much trees, how much green, gray, and blue infrastructure is in different communities. And with that, we are constantly talking with those communities and those stakeholders. So we're talking to regional planning commissions, arborists, we're talking with tree boards, and also community leaders that might not actually hold in a government office, and asking them, what data do you think you need to answer these questions, or what questions do you have, and how can we create that data, or even communicate it back to you in a report that would be useful, which again then they can kind of transfer on to policy and decision making. I think another thing as well is that because we work so collaboratively with communities, it then also just changes sometimes what the project can actually do. So thinking about the Solver project that we're working on with a bunch of different utilities across the state, one of which was, what is the return of investment on the LiDAR, the statewide LiDAR that was just flown in 2023? So LiDAR is elevation data. And thinking, can we actually start figuring out a way in which, using AI and machine learning, to find power infrastructure across the state of Vermont, especially thinking about the rural areas that's really covered with trees. I mean, we love our forests here. And then we realized that we weren't necessarily able to accomplish that goal. So then we went back to the utilities and asked, what else can we provide for you folks that would actually be useful? And one of which was a risk assessment. So then looking at which trees are kind of encroaching on the known power infrastructure in Vermont, and then saying, these specific infrastructures have this potential risk, and then we're weighting it certain ways as well. And then again, we get feedback from Green Mountain Power on some things that they classify as risks, and then we redo that risk assessment for Green Mountain Power. So again, it's this kind of iterative approach that we come to them where we can create or develop this type of data using this rigorous methodology, And then they ask us, well, what about this? Can this answer this question? And again, I think it's all about just that collaboration.
Before we go to Colin, Paige, can you remind us what LiDAR is, please?
Oh yeah, it's elevation data. So it's flown from an aircraft. It's a laser, and then it basically, the bounce back rate tells us information about how high certain features are. So it's like anything above 8 feet, we might classify as a tree, and then it also gives us information too about texture. So depending on the resolution of it, we could actually see really cool tree canopy versus like a flat roof. So it's just LiDAR, or elevation data.
Thank you.
So for me, the best research projects I've been in aren't just research projects. They often combine teaching and research and advocacy work and organizing. And so what are the right questions? Sometimes it's not just a question that's the right thing to start with, but what is the relational basis for finding the right questions? What's the actual need? And then eventually getting to questions. And I think relationships are so key to community-based participatory action research that investing is even the wrong language. You know, spending the time to be present and to work relationally rather than transactionally is super important. And from that, good questions can emerge. And so that, I'll give a couple of quick examples. When I was starting my PhD, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, but I got involved in this course. It was an experiential learning course where we'd go out and spend 10 days living in a rural community in tents and learning from indigenous elders, from conventional farmers, organic farmers, from the women leaders in the community. And one of the things that course was built by Steph, who was my advisor, who'd been building this relationship with this community for a decade and all sorts of things going on. And so he had these relationships that allowed me to come in as a student and to be able to hear and listen and engage with farmers in the middle of what was the mad cow crisis, BSE crisis game, and it totally collapsed all the markets for beef in the country. And what we were hearing from farmers was, well, one opportunity we have is direct farm marketing, more direct marketing and local food, but it's really hard to do on our own, so maybe we could think about how we might work together. And so then my PhD for 5 years was working with those farmers on that project, basically, and a process that continues on to this day. But that project was embedded in a very long-term process of relationship building that involved Steph, my advisor, but a lot of other people working together collaboratively. And so I think that's really important. A couple other things, I think good questions from where I'm sitting come from listening really well, being in good relationship, and having some humility in our work, and recognizing the diverse knowledges that need to be brought to bear on whatever needs and issues that communities are facing.
Thank you all. So I just got to say I appreciate this panel because they're being succinct. They're not going on and on, which allows me to make it a little bit more fun. So I'm going to add to this first question. And because the way you've presented it, it really sounds enthusiastic, exciting, great. Having done this kind of work too, I know that is not easy. So I'm going to move us to, can you share with us what are some of the challenges that you face when you're doing this community-based work? And I'll start with you, Colin, and then we'll move down to Jackie.
It's a weird table. It's got this skirt here that is making me very uncomfortable. So, I mean, I think about this a lot. I reflect on it a lot about how all the different things that get in the way of doing this kind of work. And I've actually written about it. I'm going to tell you these 3 things. One of which is institutional barriers for people in my position. There are all sorts of things that get in the way, from the way that financial systems work at universities, to whose knowledge counts, to tenure and promotion, all of these things. One example, in my master's, the farmer leader that was working with me on my project was allowed to be on my committee as a member. When I moved into a PhD, she had to leave my committee because her knowledge didn't count. And that's ridiculous. Like, I mean, she was way smarter than most of the other people on the committee that were PhDs, right? And so there's all sorts of institutional barriers. The second category is interrelational barriers. These are all I's: institutional, interrelational, and internal. And the interrelational is the kinds of kind of social pressures to produce lots of papers, to kind of disregard the kind of work that the relationship building I was talking about, like the time it takes to do that, isn't valued by your colleagues sometimes. I think Vermont's, or the UVM's a place where community-based research is much more valued than I've seen in other places. But there's a lot of interrelational kind of cultural things that get in the way of it from the university side of things. And then internal is the way that people in universities see themselves. And this is where I was bringing in the idea of humility and kind of setting aside this idea that that you're the hero scientist and the one with all the right questions and the one that can find the answers, and being a better listener and seeing yourself not only as a scientist, but somebody who's engaged in a process with people in communities and social movements, whatever it might be, trying to solve problems that are all the grand challenges and small challenges that we're facing in our work. I think these same challenges also manifest on the community side of things, like institutional challenges, interpersonal challenges, and internal challenges, and I've presented it more from the perspective where I'm sitting, but I think it's interesting to reflect on what those are for, what are the barriers for community partners to work with people who are based in universities. There are many of them, and I think it would be interesting to get into that, but to be succinct,
Thank you.
Stop there.
I definitely want to second the idea that institutional barriers, I think, are one of the first and foremost when doing a lot of this collaborative work, just because there's a lot of red tape around kind of who you can work with, funding, and all of that, right? So thinking about, I mean, I think that's really, I'm almost not surprised that for your PhD committee, that a community member couldn't have been on that because they didn't necessarily have a terminal degree. And I even find that sometimes when we think about capacity building or knowledge transfer, especially when, you know, we're talking about running workshops or professional development courses, so then that way we're not the only ones in the state that have access to drones or actually know what to do during the flood response, right? Because we were definitely, you know, kind of deployed immediately in 2023 and 2024, which is wonderful to be able to supply and provide that technical assistance to the community, to the communities that we live in, but also knowing that we don't want to hoard that knowledge. And so how can we kind of break through some of those institutional barriers to then continue to transfer that knowledge, build that capacity in the community in our region? I think another thing too it's honestly a pro and con that I see is working with just so many diverse groups. I feel like as you bring more and more people to the table in these projects and start to kind of think about, you know, how complex a community is, and then how that then translates to how complex the project continuously gets. And then also time as well, right? I mean, I think that we are all limited on time, and everyone's time is very valuable. But thinking about as we continue to bring in more community members, more differing of opinions, more goals that, you know, individuals might have in a project, that just again gets at, you know, then how long does this project actually last? And at the end, there always has to sometimes be an end, or, you know, to be continued, right? So thinking, just framing that and understanding that, you know, sometimes the project has to come to a close, but then there's 3 other branches that we can continue that research down that is still very much impactful for the community and for us to work with those communities. But at some point, you gotta close one chapter and then continue on. But yeah, I think that it's a pro and con.
Yeah, I think you mentioned funding, and and that can be a huge problem, especially in meteorological work, especially when you say, I'm going to be a community-based project, because especially with mesonettes or these networks, we have the opportunity to say we're going to put them on state property, will be funded completely internally by the university, it's going to be research-based. So making that decision to completely serve the community and see what they need, that really does kind of take a cut for us, because some people are like, well, if you're serving the community, let them pay for it. But we want to make this data available to people who can't afford weather stations to operate it and to do data control. So that balance is really difficult, and it can lead us into some sticky situations. It's more about, you know, endurance through that. Additionally, saying you serve the community, a lot of community members have different ideas about what you should be looking at. And so people pleasing, I call it, they all want a little piece of it. So we have our main community groups that we're listening to, including dam safety, agricultural groups, and they all have their focus. And so figuring out how to balance everybody is probably one of our biggest challenges right now, because we're trying to find locations of where to put these stations. And well, okay, if we put it below the dam, how does that help? Well, that's serving dam safety. Or if we find open land at like a resort, well, now you're just serving people who have the money. So trying to make it balanced is extremely important and extremely difficult. And on top of that, explaining why the project is so important to so many different communities who don't have the background that you have, as was mentioned in the keynote. It's really hard sometimes to explain, yeah, can we put a station here? How long? 5 years, 10 years, ideally forever. Why? That's really hard to explain and to prove. And so being able to do that and bring it down to where they're coming from, I think is a pretty big challenge, but it's really rewarding when you do succeed.
So we don't have necessarily the same challenges that the educational folks have. As the utility, we're super small, we're pretty nimble, we kind of write our own ticket on the things we want to work on, right? And so the challenges more that we see in working with the UVM students and different research groups is more just that the actual project implementation timelines are incredibly long. So you may get students who are working on a project, and that project may not actually come to fruition until way after they've left UVM, and I don't know that they get to see the fruits of their labor. Additionally, we have a really small staff, so the bigger challenge for us is managing those interactions with the student groups. We've been incredibly fortunate to have 2 rounds of Department of Energy Clean Energy Fellows. We're actually with our 2nd fellow now, and as part of that fellowship program, they have a component where they are supposed to be working with higher education institutions, so often we have our fellow do most of the heavy lifting as far as the integration with the student groups. And that's incredibly helpful, but also I think because often they're off-site and they're not as integrated into the utility, some pieces of that could be missing. So we're looking to try and bolster that. We have a lot of irons in the fire. We work with UVM, but we've also done projects with Hussing University and Boise State and Vermont State University and Norwich and UMaine. So we're trying to spread the love, so to speak, right? And I think that overall, the biggest challenge is just trying to find meaningful connections for the students that might help improve workforce development within public power. I think that we're at a juncture where it's become really evident that utilities have a lot on their plates in the energy transition to help bolster infrastructure, to combat the effects of climate change and more extreme weather events, which is, we should talk. I think that there are a lot of pathways to employment within our industry, and we're seeing a deficit of actual applicants in those areas. So for us, we're getting really good information for our discrete projects for Stowe Electric, but what does that look like on a broader scale for what does the next generation of utility workforce look like? Because it's not just climbing poles, right?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate Emma invited Jackie, and you're noticing she is the partner in the formula, not the researcher, whereas the university folks are usually representing the university. And again, thank you for your succinctness because we're doing great on time. And I teach a lot here, and when I teach, I can't stand when I start feeling that students are kind of slumping down or not like doing it. So I'm going to invite you to stand up, please. I couldn't do this if they wouldn't be great at time. And maybe let's just do, let's do something energetic. So if you can see me here, we're just going to do a little bit of bouncing. Just bounce your knees and shake your hands. A little bit of bouncing. Yeah. It feels good, huh? Energy, qigong. And then maybe like stop and keep your hands close to your core, and let's do some neck rotations. 1, 2, 3. Now the other side. 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much. So again, because these are amazing panelists that don't take advantage of the mic, I'm going to change it around, and I want to do a round of questions, just so we keep this energy flowing here. Maybe we'll do 2 or 3, especially because to me, what's really important is to discuss these challenges. One of the dangers of these approaches is to make them sound easy, because they're not easy in my own experience. So, anybody have a question?
Before we start with questions, sorry, we have folks in an overflow room and folks on Zoom, so I'm going to ask that you please raise your hand and I'll bring you a mic so that it's inclusive to everyone that's participating.
Thank you, Emma.
Okay, sorry, here we go. You go first.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is for anybody, and it's about your approach when you're getting community input on the project. How do you gather and encourage people to offer that input?
So with some of our projects, we've had direct input from neighbors to our parcels. So we've got a microhydro project that we're working on. We have, as I mentioned previously, an 1822 sawmill that's a historically listed building. We have a building that we are going to be turning into an emergency operations center. And we've had students give presentations to our community. We've invited our neighbors in to see the work that the students have done, proposing different changes to our site to help mitigate stormwater runoff, or the structural integrity of the mill as it relates to potentially supporting solar panels in the past. So we reach out to stakeholders in our community and we invite them in. Peggy and Lorelei, who was the intern who worked on the EV project, went and presented to the select board in Stowe, was it last week, 2 weeks ago? We try and facilitate opportunities so that the learning that's going on through these partnerships is being pushed out to stakeholders in our community. But then we also do things like we talk about it within our industry. We submitted some of our UVM projects for an Energy Innovator Award from the American Public Power Association. And we got it because it's a cool project and you guys were great, right? So we do try and facilitate the opportunities for direct interactions. Some UVM projects have happened on neighboring parcels because people who saw what was happening here then were like, hey, I've got a project. So it's been really great. That's how we go about it. So.
Thank you. And panelists, don't feel obliged to respond to every question. Just sure. If you want to, go ahead. If not, you can pass. Anybody else? Colin?
I've definitely had projects where I've been asking people to provide input onto my projects, but other times it's more like I'm providing input onto their projects. It's kind of like co-construction of a project. So in a relationship that I had for several years in Europe with the Land Workers Alliance, an alliance of farm workers and farmers in the UK, we were working on several things, one of which was trying to think about what kind of grassroots learning approaches could support agroecology. And we're just generally talking about this in one time because we're at a conference, a workshop together with Jody, a colleague of mine. We're on a train ride back from Brussels to London. And we're sitting there and she's like, oh, what we're really trying to do is get this kind of understanding of what's going on across Europe. We want to do the survey, but we can't figure out how to do it. What I could use is actually your input into our process. And because we had been in a relationship and there was some trust, we were able to then develop a research project, which was to survey and do interviews with people from across Europe doing these agroecology learning, grassroots learning schools and experiences, which then led to a whole line of work together over the years that had some of which was then providing input into my work and other ways. So it was this kind of like really reciprocal approach that again was really rooted in relationships.
Just really quickly, so I think one of the ways in which we have community members be involved in our projects is, again, they come to us with like a potential need or a question. So it's actually community selected who then is actually working directly with us. Again, I think there's pros and cons of that. It limits the number of people right within a room. We would love to have a public town hall, but that might not always be doable. But then again, it might also be biasing, right? Who's actually being able to be in the room? Is it the same community members that get to make all of the decisions about their community for every type of project that they're working on?
Sam, you want to go or you want to pass?
I mean, they've kind of
Okay.
they've said it
thank
all.
you. Yeah, one other thing that I want to know, a lot of people mention as a challenge the funding. And I think this is, just want to make a point that this is very systemic, because when you're working with a community partner, sometimes the nature of the grant won't allow you to give them funds. Sometimes you can do it if you're skillful, but overall, it's hard to do. And that defeats the purpose of really co-creating, because partners need to be paid too. They need to cover people's time or their own expenses. So I appreciated that Dr. Becker mentioned that, and finding a place really also means changing some of the structures that we have along the lines of deep transformation to support research enterprise. So maybe, Emma, should we do, yeah?
So I'm going to sort of flip the question of how do you get to the right question and ask, how do you get to, or do you even need to get to, with a diverse group of people working on a project, to a shared understanding of the answer to the question, why?
Did you get that one? Yeah? Okay. Any volunteers?
So most of our projects don't have a singular definitive answer involved. And I think for us, we welcome diversity of solutions. We're looking for different perspectives, and we like being able to survey all of the options and then plug into what our operations look like, what our abilities are as a utility, to select the one that's going to work best for us, or to take bits and pieces of A and B and put them together. So I'm not sure that we've had a singular answer to any of our questions. What we've seen, though, is the relationship between the students working on these projects, watching them figure out how to get on the same page and work together collaboratively and effectively with a clear defined outcome within their minds has been very interesting. And, you know, wherever we can facilitate that bit of learning is really helpful, again, overall in their future careers in workforce development. So it's a skill that not everybody has, and it's really great to see it developing.
I have a little bit to add to that. I think, at least with our line of work, everybody asks the question that's tailored to, you know, their own field of work. Why did this rainfall happen? Why didn't you let me know it was coming? Why are we not better at forecasting? And I think for us, the way we kind of get everybody to get to that answer is not necessarily answering that exact question, but redirecting it and saying, okay, right now we don't know, right? We can only provide you this data so that you can make your own informed decisions, so that they end up helping themselves to answer that solution. Like, why did my crops die? Why is there not enough water? How do I do this? And so we try to make it almost like an actionable answer for them. So like, okay, we give you the data of the current state. This is how you can respond to your crops based off of the current matter. So it's just turning those questions a little bit so that they have the involvement and we do as well.
Thank you so much. Paige or Colin?
I can go real quick. So I think the first thing that anytime we kind of start a project, there's always one overarching why. It's, you know, it's funded for this particular reason, or this community wants to, you know, figure out where they're going to do tree planting initiatives over the next 10 years, right? But then I think as the project develops more and as folks come to the table and ask, well, can your data show us this? Or have you ever thought about doing this? Then I think that the whys get more complex, but also more exciting, because then we can say, we've never done that before, let's try it, you know? And then maybe it does answer that question and maybe it doesn't, but it's, again, just kind of this constant iterative approach of the overarching why is the community asked for this and we can provide that, but then the whys of how other data that we produce could be useful, I think is just, I'm not going to say infinite, but that's the only word I can think of.
I'm going to say something quick. In complex problems that we're looking at and thinking about, even the questions and the reasons why people are coming to a problem are so different. People are situated so differently within communities. Like saying a community has expressed this need. Well, communities are made up of many people. And people are there for different reasons. You really have to keep that in mind because it creates all sorts of dynamics and potentially power imbalances that you need to keep in mind. And so too are answers. Like answers are, for one subset of people, might not be the right answers for others if we're thinking about, complex community problems. And it's okay for there to be different answers and to recognize and to acknowledge and to give light to there are different interpretations of the findings that we have here for different reasons. For example, in the project I mentioned, gender was a dynamic within the group that was really obviously a problem to all the women in the group, and some of the men in the group didn't see it, and they had different interpretations and didn't completely agree with it, but agreed to lift both of those things up and say, well, there were different interpretations of this, but we need to acknowledge that the answers to what's going on in this group are seen in different ways by different people, and erasing difference is the last thing we want to do in these processes because that's part of our commitment to equity.
Thank you, Colin. We'll take one more question and then move on to my questions.
I'm curious, we talked about the funding challenges a little bit, and I'm curious what you've seen as the role of private philanthropy in this kind of community-based type research, and ways that could be supportive or additive, or does that just add another layer of challenge to the challenges that you're already seeing?
I can start.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of philanthropic support for the Institute for Agroecology. I've never had it before I came here. The US is a different context than Canada or the UK where I used to work. And what I found is that the support that we've received has been way more flexible, way more possible to use for the different things that aren't allowed through federal grants. And I mean, there's some complication at UVM for how you use these funds, and the universities kind of make it a little bit more difficult. But I think philanthropy is part of the mix. I mean, it's super problematic. We're taking billionaires' money and applying it for like social purposes. It's a broken system. These should be publicly supported processes, and we really need to figure that out in the long run. But in the short run, I think there's at least in our case, there's been a really important input from philanthropy. And I also see philanthropy doing this really interesting work, trying to transform the way funding works broadly. Which again is a problematic dynamic, that they have the voice that can then be the ones that are like, well, you need to shift more money towards bottom-up solutions and agroecology and whatnot, but they're doing it, which is an interesting dynamic to watch. This is something that I also study, financing of food system transformation, so I think a lot about this, so thanks for the question. Yeah.
I think that with some philanthropic funding that we get from the Spatial Analysis Lab, it really allows us to just be way more flexible, I think, with the projects that we're able to do, with the questions that we're able to help answer for communities. Because again, like, we aren't limited by federal regulations in that sense, or federal funding regulations. And then as long as it really just kind of coincides and aligns with, one, the mission of the university, right, the mission of the Rubenstein School, but then also the mission of the SAL, because we also have one, right? So creating actionable and usable information for communities, as long as it meets all of those, philanthropic funding really allows us to then go for projects that without it, we might not be able to kind of find those answers, or even, I don't know, leverage some technical assistance for communities or anything like that.
Jackie or Samantha?
I mean, you guys pretty much said it all. I'm still new to the system, so I'm not sure of the ins and outs of the university, so I can't quite speak on what's the limiting factors. So.
Same thing. Yeah.
This isn't philanthropic, but I think the Leahy Institute's the partnership grants are a really good example of an effort to try to have a more balanced approach to funding and partnerships. When I was in Canada, there was the Social Science and Humanities Research Council, which is like the NSF, but for social sciences in Canada. And they used to give out these Community University Research Alliance grants, where a lot of them, structurally, you're able to get money out to community partners in ways that seem much more difficult with federal funding here. In Europe, the Horizon 2020 program, a lot of the money was able to go out. In fact, you couldn't have projects unless community partners were part of them and receiving funds and a full partner in it. And that seems like structurally here, there's some work to do federally at some point, or with all publicly funded money to solve that, because it's a terrible approach. There is in the UK, this was the opposite direction. They shifted all of this overseas development aid funding to research away from direct funding, because they thought research would support it. And then they put a stipulation in that 80% of the funds had to go to researchers in the UK instead of going to, directly as it was. And so there's all sorts of funny ways that there's both innovations that we can see that work really well, but also really problematic ways that grants are set up and structurally problematic. So something to keep in mind.
And something I will add about funding after doing this work for a couple of decades is diverse funding is really the key, because sometimes you work with communities that are already doing a lot of the work and you don't need a lot of funding. You can cover it. So maybe a very small grant from a foundation is enough. And sometimes you run into these projects that are bigger and you might need like a federal grant to actually do it. So from a very practical perspective, like keeping a big picture approach to the funding and not just saying all I get is USDA or all I get, but a little bit of everything seems to be a good way to do it. So I'm going to move us on to one more question from me for the panel. And you covered all my questions in what you've already said, so I'm going to throw a new one. But I don't think it's that hard. And I think it's a very important one for people that are interested in engaging in this way as you do your work. And I'm going to start with Samantha, and then Paige, and then Jackie, and with you, Colin. But what do you think are some of the individual and team skills that are helpful to do community engaged work? So as you, as an individual that comes into the work, but also in terms of your team, these skills or values.
Okay, so for me, individual skills with community, it's really just communication. I mean, you have to learn how to be able to talk to so many different people at so many different levels. I think I started understanding that when I, tried to play the role of a high school teacher teaching physics. That in its own way was like, there's so much work to be done to be able to articulate and make your work valued and known to everybody. And also, I would say a skill is gaining trust. Trust and honesty and clarity, I've learned come hand in hand, because I've spoken to people about the work I do and they have asked why, or you can make the flooding stop, and it's no, I can't. So I think the people skills are honestly the biggest factor in my work. The technical skills kind of follow. You can learn that from Google. You can learn that from a classroom. You can't learn how to communicate and build relationships. And I think with our team, just that works for everybody. We all are playing different roles to support this group, and we're all pulling from all of our knowledge bases. So having those connections and just, learning to build friendships within the community, and I would say trust is probably the biggest thing.
Thank you. Paige, can we go with you?
Yeah, I feel like you definitely kind of nailed most of them, and I think it also goes back to something that you had said, Colin, which is the relationship building, right? So those people skills. So I think first and foremost, it goes back to that listening. So being an active listener, really just sitting down and not necessarily thinking of the next thing that you're going to be saying, but actually absorbing what folks are saying to you. I think also just creativity and problem solving, right? So I have to think about that day to day when I meet with stakeholders, community members, government officials. All of that is, sometimes we're handed a problem and it's like, well, you have $5,000. What can you do with that money, and how can you solve this problem? So it's really just being creative with that. And then I think for the team skills, it's really having those technical chops to do that work, right? So it's me understanding what my team is capable of. I think that they're capable of anything and everything that they put their mind to, because I work with some phenomenal people, but really being realistic about that. So thinking about the capacity that my team currently has and the bandwidth to not overwork them, because I think burnout is it's something that we just need to avoid. But, we all might be we all might contribute to that at some point. So the technical skills, I think, also follow, but you have to have those technical skills to then produce and be able to do really rigorous, robust research that can create or help answer questions that the community members have.
So, great. You guys covered a lot of it. I would add curiosity and inquisitiveness, particularly when you're engaging community members. That's really important because that goes hand in hand with listening. You have to be curious about what their interests are. I think some skills that haven't been covered would be the ability to read a room, right? Every community has its own weird stuff going on under the covers, and like figuring out that dynamic and what the local politics might be and who doesn't like who and what the problems might, unfold from that. Creating rapport and developing buy-in by being able to frame what it is you're working on in like, hey, what's in it for me? Because that's really ultimately the question almost everybody's asking themselves. What's in it for me? If you can explain what that is and get people on board with you, I think that really goes a long way to ultimately reaching success in the project. But those are all soft skills, but you're right, the technical skills are so key. That's what's the foundation.
I teach a course on participatory action research where I think about this a lot, about how to bring people in to build the understanding and kind of approaches and skills. So, and I think it's really important for people to know who they are and where they come from and what the reason they are coming to the work and what that means when they come into a room, like who you are and entering into space is really important, what your history is, because that really defines your relationships. In participatory action research and community-based research is based on relationships. And from there, there's also all the approaches and methods. So in this course, then we move to approaches and methods and thinking about the values that underpin those different approaches. I think a commitment to reflection, so always thinking about the work that you're doing and stepping back and looking at it and asking people and opening up the space for people to give you feedback and have conversations about how things are going in a process of continuous learning, because we were picking up experiences and our history is behind us, but informing what we're doing. And every experience we have can inform what we have going forward, but only if we take the time to reflect and to learn. And then the last one, I think you have to bring joy to your work. I was on a panel celebrating the work of somebody in my life named Michel Pembert, and his work was defined by, it was conviviality and disobedience, so he was disobedient as well. And then Molly Anderson, who's a part of our group, she won a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Ag and Human Values Conference last year, and her speech was about one of the defining characteristics of her work was being kind. And so bringing kindness and joy and conviviality to your work and showing up as a full human is a really important thing in this work.
Thank you so much. That was great. I'm going to add humility. The keynote speaker told us that, and I would say that it's really important because if you're looking into co-creating knowledge with somebody else, you can't come in thinking that your knowledge is better or is better than anybody else's. You really have to come in with an open mind and humble. So with that, I want to open it again for questions from the audience. Emma is going to help me with that. We have someone here who had his hand raised before. He's looking at me a little threateningly.
No, I also know I'm up against the break. But my question is actually about that point. It's about time. And Jackie alluded to issues and challenges around time. And just to give you a moment to think, we're all under different time pressures. Academics are thinking in terms of years, in terms of grant cycles, publication cycles. Students are thinking in terms of semesters. Businesses are thinking in terms of increasing their foot traffic or revenues this quarter. Power company customers are thinking about getting their power on again in the next 15 minutes. And I'm wondering, from years to minutes, how do you manage expectations around time? Because people want, I'm just curious.
Okay, I have a very good answer. Well, I think so. I'm biased. Under promise when working with the community is at least what I've learned. Not in a negative way, right? So the last project, which was, once again, another network, weather network, I came into the project and they said, we're installing 74 stations in the state in 2 years. okay, where's the land? Where are we going to do this? Who are we going to reach? And they were just like, I don't know. So I think just being a little bit realistic about the time frame and not overpromising, okay? Because it's like the conditions may change. We're working with people, and people are like, I work with weather. I feel like people can be a little bit more unpredictable sometimes. So that's my answer, is just give them a reasonable solution by knowing your own strengths and weaknesses and knowing what it fully entails. So I think fully understanding the project, knowing those goals, and then just add, an extra third, 2/3 of the time, so that nobody's disappointed, but everybody's still happy in the outcome.
Anybody? Yeah.
Time is the great oppressor all the time. It's like always like on top of us. But I think people have such different ideas of time. I thought it was really interesting. You were talking about the opposite, that your work is so long-term that students come and they can't see the end of it. It's usually the opposite, with communities want to work super fast and academics are super slow, because there's, there's that to keep in mind. It's just different. But I really think it's important to talk about these things, to talk about expectations, to talk about constraints openly, because if you don't, they're going to show up in the work when people are disappointed. It's under promise and over deliver, and talk about it openly, because in that way you can negotiate, you can figure out, you can come to an agreement on how things will work in a spirit of reciprocity, knowing the constraints in academic setting and the needs here and constraints here, and coming to some sort of agreement on how to work together, or deciding not to work together before you start working because it's not a good match. That's something we also have to consider.
Jackie or Paige? Want to pass? Or yeah, okay. Emma, more questions?
Yeah, we've got 1 minute. So maybe if it's a rapid fire one?
We started a little late.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. I'm a statistics student, and I'm really excited about AI's ability to process data and enhance research, but I'm also worried about how it shapes and influences what questions we ask. It all seems to be like the latest tech trends and whose voices are getting left out. And my question is, how can we ensure that AI is used to ask the right questions, ones that are ethical, inclusive, and guided by human judgment rather than just algorithms, efficiency, or what gets funded?
It's a very good, very hard question. Thank you.
That's a good closing question. Short answer is I think that we just have to be really intentional about how we are utilizing AI, right? And I think that just actually gets to the meat and potatoes of your question, is like, how do we even get intentional about it? And it's not necessarily using it as a catch-all that can do anything and everything, but having a very clear reason why we're utilizing it, right? So in the lab right now, we're utilizing it to help us identify aquatic invasive species, so like Japanese knotweed and all of that. So we fly our drones, we capture a bunch of data, and then we're able to use manual folks. So we have a great team of technicians. They go in, they classify and create training data, and then we plug it into our AI models. But we're really intentional about it. We just don't give the AI model the imagery raw and say, tell us something about it. It's, all right, what's this actual workflow, and just being really intentional about it.
One more from the panel, or you're all passing? Okay. Emma, you get it. You get your time
Thank
back.
you all
Yeah.
so much. That was a fabulous panel. Round of applause.